Now, I don't create videos all that often, but I'd like to think when I do, I create good ones. So this one's no exception. This one is going to touch on many topics. I'm going to share with you an article, a video clip, and another video clip where I predicted what is going on right now. So we're going to touch on to the question of housing shortage. Is it real or is it hoax? Then we're going to look at the prices, where they're going currently, what's the current housing status. Then we've got the foreign buyers, mostly Chinese, and how they have to pay double the stamp duty. I'm probably going to omit some of the points that will deter Chinese buyers from continuing to invest in Australian property, or should I say speculate in the property. So as far as I know, then in New South Wales and Victoria, probably a few other states, stamp duty is double for the foreign buyers. They're only allowed to buy off the plan and or brand new properties. The borrowing has tightened significantly, where the domestic Australian lenders, banks, are requiring foreign investors and borrowers to provide a lot more paperwork before they're given the loans. And it's been reported that those foreign investors have put down the deposit and haven't been able to obtain finance, in which case they had to sell or just forfeit the deposit and move away. And then we've got the Xi Jinping, the Communist Party leader, who actually said just recently at the Congress that housing is for living and not speculating, and the Chinese government is currently advising their citizens to not buy residential property, instead invest in some sort of other productive asset, such as farms, factories, and that sort of thing. I think there's currently a 50% limit on new developments that can be sold on to the foreign buyers, where the many developers have built and sold off the plan up to 90% of the foreign buyers, which is going to create many other problems where those buyers are just going to have to walk away from the properties. Another thing that's happened is that China is tightening the way Chinese can take money out of China. Bitcoin and cryptos was one of those ways to do it, but currently I've actually spoken to one of the guys that I work with. He just come back from China. He's Chinese ethnic background, and he said that you're not allowed to use Chinese renminbi to buy Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency, which pretty much means that you can't anymore convert renminbis into Bitcoin and therefore convert it into Australian dollar, US dollar, euros, or any other world currency where you can actually take it out of the country and buy something with it. So all of these things are negative for the way that the property is going to go. But let's see if that's actually reflected in the current status.
Cooling rather than crashing. Why Sydney could be headed for a 10% price fall.
And yes, one more thing, a very important thing, is that the interest rates are at what some call a 5,000-year low. Yes, some people have gone back that far back in history. Martin Armstrong is one of those, or probably the only one, and they're calling it the bottom. It has to be the bottom. It's close to the zero. It can't go down any further, so it's on the way up. So that just can't be good for any asset class that is highly leveraged.
There's further evidence the steam has come out of the Australian housing market. Auction rates in Sydney have now dropped around 20% in 1 year, as foreign buyer interest appears to have waned. It comes as a new report says housing undersupply is not the problem.
Okay, housing undersupply is not the problem. So we're getting to the point of housing shortage. Is it real or is it hoax? Well, have a look at the email I created on April 1st, 2016, so more than a year and a half ago.
Very bearish on property when looking at the current supply. They do tell us that it's, the property in Australia is in short supply, so supply issues dictate the price to continue to go up. Now, whenever I hear someone say that, I just ask them to go and try and buy property in any area in Sydney, or probably Melbourne as well, and I don't see them having trouble finding property to buy. It is a matter of what price you want to pay, fair enough, but is there a shortage? No. You want to buy a house, you want to buy a unit, they're there. Whether you want to rent a unit or a house, same story. You can always find it. So where's the shortage? But don't listen to me, make up.
Alright, well, there's no shortage. This video that I created more than a year and a half ago is titled Australian Property Shortage Hoax Finally Revealed. Correction coming. Now that correction has or hasn't come. I'm going to bring it all home at the end of this video. And before I show you what the business has to say, playing this clip for you, I just want to read part of the article from ArmstrongEconomics.com/blog. The title of this blog is Interest Rates Will Double. Now, what Martin Armstrong does is every year he does WEC, World Economic Conference. Every year he's been doing it for decades, and his model predicts many movements and capital movements. He releases free information on his website, and he's got a subscription service as well. But by free information, I mean it's many articles every day. So I'm kind of religiously following this man. So he's obviously not going to tell in the public forum what the World Economic Conference topics he touched on and what he predicted. But there was a question that came in that he's answered. So the question, among other things, says your forecast at the conference that the rates would rise very rapidly as we move into monetary crisis cycle. When I returned from Greece, the latest news here is that so many people do not even have the money left to pay taxes. Is this part of the first stone in the water that sets off the waves of the monetary crisis cycle? Not to read his whole answer, he said that we hit a 5,000-year low. The reversals we provided at the conference show we are looking at a near doubling in rates when we cross that number. Okay, so once again we hit a 5,000-year low. The reversals we provided at the conference, which we obviously don't have access to unless we were at that conference, show that we are looking at a near doubling in rates when we cross that number. So rates are only going up. That can't be good for any property that uses leverage.
There's further evidence the steam has come out of the Australian housing market. Auction rates in Sydney have now dropped around 20% in 1 year, as foreign buyer interest appears to have waned. It comes as a new report says housing undersupply is not the problem. Rather, an oversupply of property could leave the market vulnerable to price falls. Here's Carrington Clark.
What happened to all those analysts that kept saying the property is always going to keep going up because there's an undersupply? And again, a year and a half ago I was saying that there's plenty of supply. You can buy or rent property in any part of Sydney or Melbourne for that matter, if you look hard enough and if you're prepared to pay the prices that they're asking. So it's not the supply, it's the prices. It's expensive. And they're going to come down because of those points that I made at the beginning of the video.
Dark clouds are gathering around the Australian housing market, making selling hard work for vendors and their agents.
There was a lot of buyers out at the beginning of the year. They were a lot more pushed to buy this time of year. They're a bit more calmer. A lot of boxes need to be ticked, that sort of thing. They've got a lot of choice.
National auction clearance rates last weekend were 65.4%, a significant drop in the past year. Economists and the government have long argued that a lack of supply was driving prices higher. But a new report says Australia has too many dwellings, and instead it's speculation that's driven the market.
So largely it's heavily based on momentum, is the largest driver we find of price growth for houses. So supply is not really having a big impact on that.
Property is still a hot topic for investors, but the RBA is sounding the alarm.
There are going to be more frequent occasions when house prices do actually experience falls for a period of time.
Over the past few years, foreign buyers have helped drive property prices to record highs. But the RBA is worried if prices stall or go backwards, they could take fright.
If we've had large amounts of construction built in anticipation of their presence, if they were to leave the market, that's potentially a greater concern.
Sellers are hoping the cooling market is only temporary.
If we had a crystal ball, we'd all be multi-millionaires. So moving into the new year, we're just going to have to see what happens.
But if there is an oversupply problem, clearance rates and prices could have a long way to fall yet.
Carrington Clark there. Well, a falling auction clearance rate could be good news for a Reserve Bank reluctant to raise rates. And while an easing of demand could see property prices drop, experts say values will cool rather than crash. I spoke to Chief Economist for AMP Capital, Shane Oliver, earlier.
You've got to understand that the mainstream economists and people that are interviewed on these sort of shows will never come out and say they're going to crash, even if they think they're going to crash. They're just not allowed to say that. They would potentially lose their jobs because their boss would say, hey, do you understand that we are heavily tied to the property prices and your comments are hurting our business?
Shane Oliver, we're seeing auction clearance rates fall sharply. Does this mean that prices will follow?
It probably does. We've seen in the middle of last decade and also around the time of the GFC when auction clearance rates fell to the levels we've seen over the last few weeks, which is basically into the 50s, we saw prices fall in Sydney and eventually in Melbourne on an annual basis. So what these numbers are telling me is that over the next few months we're going to see further declines in Sydney property prices.
To what magnitude?
My feeling is that prices are going to come off 5 to 10%. So I'm certainly not looking for a crash. I think to get a crash, you'd have to see either much higher interest rates, much higher unemployment, or a continuing surge in the supply of apartments. I don't think those things are going to happen. More likely scenario is that this combination of tougher measures by APRA to slow down lending to interest-only borrowers and particularly to investors, combined with an increase in the supply of apartments starting to hit the property market, along with, of course, all of this feeding back and leading to a more negative sentiment on the part of investors. I think those factors are going to drive a 5 to 10% fall in prices, which, mind you, I think will be a healthy decline.
And is this just a Sydney story, or will it be the other East Coast markets that have also seen huge growth, like Brisbane and Melbourne?
At the current point in time, it's really a Sydney story, but I think as we go into next year, it's also going to become a Melbourne story. We're starting to see auction clearance rates in Melbourne follow Sydney down, although Melbourne is getting a bit of support from very strong population growth. And when it comes to Brisbane, I don't see big falls in Brisbane. I think falls in Brisbane will be quite modest. In fact, the trend in Brisbane might well remain up because Brisbane hasn't really participated in the property boom that Melbourne and Sydney have had over the last couple of years.
And when you say 5 to 10%, that sounds like a lot, but is it really when compared to the run-up that we've had?
I think the reality is that Sydney property prices are up 80%, so a 5 to 10% pullback is not particularly great in the great scheme of things. That's a fairly modest pullback. You'd call that a bit of a correction, a bit of a pause in the market. I think that's probably the best way for investors and homeowners to see it. Likewise in Melbourne, prices up 50, 60% over the last 5 years. Again, a 5 to 10% pullback would hardly be a disaster.
And what does it mean for the Reserve Bank? They have been very cognizant of the heat in some parts of the housing market around the country. And we've heard from the RBA head of financial stability today that they are looking at property. If we do see prices come back a little bit, will that give the RBA more scope to raise?
I think the Reserve Bank would be very happy at the cooling in the Sydney and to a lesser degree Melbourne property markets that we're starting to see. This is precisely what they wanted to happen. They've worked with APRA quite hard to try and cool in the property market, and that's what we're now seeing. So if we see the property market cool off a little bit, that gives the Reserve Bank a bit more flexibility in terms of interest rates for the rest of the economy. If the Sydney and Melbourne property market had remained red hot, then I think the risks of an earlier and perhaps dangerous rise in interest rates would have increased. But with the property markets cooling off in Sydney and Melbourne, that gives the Reserve Bank scope to leave interest rates on hold at low levels for longer.
Shane Oliver.
Yes, he's only playing it safe.